let's have discussion over items we missed and make sure that we're applying the strategies properly. Make sure that we know what we're looking for, remembering our filters, our perspective, quantity, timing, degree, right? Catching the key words to filter out, and make sure we know where to look for the answer. So, questions in first reading, which was, I guess, some dude named Liney in a restaurant, meeting some people. Yes?
4.
Number 4. So number 4 and number 5, of course, tandem, right? Let's work it together. Did you get number 5 correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so here's what typically happens if you've gotten the lines correct, but don't have the answer correct. Either we didn't use the words exactly from those lines to compare it against, or you missed a disqualifier. So let's take a look at what is the first question. Well, the original question is, what's Limey's primary impression of the party for? Point of view? About? Any other potential disqualifiers to worry about? Sorry?
His first impression.
It is kind of a timing, yeah. First impression, there's a timing concern, and what else is a concern? One of the favorites is quantity. If it's not referring to the party before, if it's referring to one person only, that's a concern. So I'm looking at timing, I'm looking at quantity as well as potential disqualifiers. Now, in the line, but you found the correct line, so let's just go to number 5 and tell me what lines did you find which are correct.
55 to 59.
So go ahead and read those if you would, please.
But it was the woman's voices, the terrible, not quite sober pitch of the woman's voices, which caused Limey to skim over 2 whole pages without knowing what was on them.
So if this is the answer is,
A.
no, the answer is using these words. Before I look at what they give me, I articulate it with these words, and I go, his impression was they had terrible voices, right? And it made him skim over pages. They had terrible voices and made him skim over pages. Then I go look at number 4, and A jumps off the page at me. Because I'm using those words. And now, I never expect them to use the exact words. That's never going to happen. But I expect them to use synonyms. I expect them to say similarly the same thing in a broader way. Or I expect some sort of figurative reference. And in this case, it was quite literal, noisy and distracting because he skimmed over pages. So that one, in retrospect, seems like, oh, that seems so obvious now. So the question that you need to kind of fine tune in your thinking is, what was it that you missed? I think you got all the disqualifiers because you got the right set of lines, and it was the referring to more than one. Are we articulating the answer using those words from those lines and comparing is the question. So that's, I mean, I can't answer that for you. I'm trying to lead you through the question so you can think to yourself, yeah, that's what I have to be more careful with. Let me articulate the answer with these words before I go look at the answers they offer. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, what else in this first reading? Sorry? Number 9. Now,
I got 8 right though.
but here's the catch. And I did this with a student like a month or so ago. We're like, this answer doesn't make sense.
Yeah, that's what
You know
I
what?
thought when I
But this is, I'm glad we ran into this now. It's not a tandem pair.
Yeah. I was so.
We were trying to apply it to the previous and it wasn't
I don't
working.
even think I read the question.
Okay, so note to self, this is very important. Sometimes they'll ask you a question that looks like a tandem pair, but it's a standalone. It's a standalone. It's got to be an answer for itself.
I wish they tried to answer as a tandem pair.
Yeah.
Like,
So
everybody the question like this is not making sense at all.
Yeah, it would. If it were a tandem pair, it would be a different answer for sure. Yeah, but it's a standalone. So do note to self. Not all questions where they give lines of evidence are tandems. Sometimes they stand alone. And we kind of apply the same strategies within that same question. But if you're trying to apply it to the previous, you're gonna be confused like I was with my student for a little while. Yeah, that's the issue. What else? And continue, anything else in the reading section going further forward? Number 13. Okay, so in some ways, these questions are hardest to answer because they don't give us lines of reference, and it's like, okay, where do I find? I know the answer is gonna be in here pretty straightforward, but I gotta find it, where is it? So, women's effect on public life. Well, I see some evidence for it when it says, and by the way, we also can disqualify answers. So if I'm looking at line 9, it said, well, I'd start back at line 6. But while woman holds a subordinate relation in society to the other sex, it is not because it was designed that her duties or her influence should be any less important. That should disqualify one of the options they give you, right? One of the options they give you is that it's overlooked or unnecessary. I could rule out A and C because of that. Then it says, but it was designed that the mode of gaining influence or exercising power should be altogether different. So, which one of these would mean that it was different than the way the men's influence is? Well, symbolic, I'm down to B and D because I've already ruled out the other two. I'm down to B and D, and symbolic still seems like it's not important, it's just kind of symbolized, but it's still all pervading, it said. So indirect would mean it's just a different way. And I think there's more evidence later. I don't know if anyone has anything to add to that, like where you found your evidence. I think there's, what does it say somewhere later? It says, just that her social circle is the home, and that's indirect to the society at large.
Yeah, it says whatever obliges her in any way to exert coercive influences throws her out of her appropriate sphere.
Yeah. So again, sometimes it's easier from the reading to rule out because of the words like overlooked and unnecessary. I don't like because it just said early on that her role is extremely important. Other questions? 18?
15.
15? I would say anytime when we look in the text and you see a vocabulary word that's linked to another word with and, that's your key. Notice that it says that, but it was designed that the mode of gaining influence and of exercising power should be altogether different and peculiar. Now, that doesn't mean that peculiar is synonymous with different, but I'm linking it with different. And I would take that and I'd go into my options and go, the best thing that you could link to with different would be, well, maybe we run into some vocab problems in here, but it would not be eccentric because that's a degree weird. Surprising is also, I'm concerned about the degree, and I don't think it means anything close to different. And then infrequent is a timing issue, not a quality issue. Distinctive means essentially different. So anytime you link your vocab with another word with and, that's going to be critical to helping you unlock that. 18, so we got 17 right, huh?
Yes.
All right, so usually if we get the first one right and the lines wrong, it's because the lines we chose, we didn't articulate using words from those lines, and we find that these lines kind of support the answer, but the words don't answer the actual question. So, first question, what does Grimke say about human rights? Oh, that's a nice, easy question. Point of view of the author about human rights. I don't really see any disqualifiers here other than it's human rights plural, and I'm sensitive to singular plural. It doesn't have an impact here, but I'm always looking at that, right? plural. All right, so, what does Grimke say about, so give me the lines you chose, and let's talk about what the answer would be if that was, because when you get a question this broad, like every set of lines can possibly provide an answer.
Yeah,
So,
I chose 58 through 61.
So read those for me if you would.
Human beings have rights because they are moral beings. The rights of all men grow out of their moral nature, and as all men have the same moral nature, they have essentially the same rights.
So, if this is in fact about human rights, which it seems to be, the answer would be that human rights are based on our moral nature. We all have moral nature, we all have same human rights. Let's take those words and go compare it to the correct answer in 17, which is, they retain their moral authority. I like it. So far, it looks like this is my tandem. However, the answer you provided, and this is one of their favorites, the answer you provided, okay, connecting to the moralness in the first half of B, does not support the second half of B.
Okay.
You see that?
Yeah.
So, A in 18, I think does provide the first half of the correct answer. And so your takeaway is, the correct lines must support both parts of that answer. And what's lacking is this connection to recognized by law. What's it? I gotta find something that somehow connects to law, whether it says directly or indirectly, there has to be some connection to providing that answer as well. So that is exactly as I said, the lines you chose absolutely support the answer, but they don't answer both parts of the answer.
Okay.
So let's go look at who got 18 correct. So what lines are they?
61 to 65.
Would you read those, please?
These rights may be wrestled from the slave, but cannot be.
I love the fact that you said wrestle, because that's exactly the word it's related to, right? So a lot of students look at rested and they're like, I don't know what that means. It means wrestle. Taken by force.
His title to himself as perfect now as is that of Lyndon Beecher. It is stamped on his moral being and is like it, imperishable. Now, if these rights are founded in the nature, the way it's talked about.
Where does it stop? Imperishable. So we definitely make a connection to the moral being, so that provides the evidence for the first half of the answer, right? Of 17. But now, what's the connection to whether it's recognized by law or not? We may wrest it or wrestle it from them so that we don't recognize it, but they still have it. And I think the word imperishable was another huge clue. Okay? Our rights are imperishable. They can't be taken from us. They can't be destroyed. So that supports the whether it's recognized by law or not part. Yep. All right. Next.
Yeah.
22, I hear. Okay, let's read line 14, and let's read around it to get contextual clues. Best clue usually comes when you read through a sentence or two. All right, so conventional industrial agriculture has become incredibly efficient on a simple land-to-food basis. I already linked this with the word efficient. Land to food. It's efficient on a simple land to food basis. And then I read through, thanks to fertilizers, mechanization, and irrigation, each American farmer feeds over 155 people worldwide. And then conventional farming gets more and more crop per square foot of cultivated land, over 170 bushels of corn per acre in Iowa, for example, which means less territory needs to be converted. Okay? So to me, it's staying focused on land to food. simple land of food. Remember, the strategy is, do we link to other words, do we have a barrage of our own words, and then as a last resort, we'll go plug the words in place. Right now, I think I understand what I would use with my own language would be on a nothing, and I don't try to look for a single synonym. I would say on a nothing but land to food basis. On a simple land to food basis, I would only, nothing but. Not taking into account any other factors. There's my phrase to explain what I think it's trying to say. And then I go, look, modest is not connecting to the point. Unadorned, do we know what unadorned means? If we don't know what it means, we have to leave it. Then easy, I don't think that doing all this work is easy. So I'm gonna throw out B and D. I don't know C, and what does straightforward mean? It's pretty straightforward. I think straightforward connects to me with what I said earlier, which is not taking into account any other factors. So I think straightforward would work. So even though I don't know unadorned, I'm gonna pick straightforward. Now, if I did not think straightforward worked, if I didn't think it worked, then I'd be forced to pick unadorned, which would be incorrect in this case.
What does unadorned mean?
To be adorned means to be decorated. And so unadorned means without decoration, more or less. So the way I walk through it, what's your takeaway? You need to articulate that to yourself. I connected with efficiency, and then I connected it's land to food only and nothing else, no other factors involved, and that to me says straightforward. Next. Did we get 27? So we're gonna go back to the same issue, which is if you've gotten the lines correct and missed the answer, I'm gonna suggest, 9 times out of 10, it's because we did not articulate the answer using the words from those lines clearly enough. So let's do that. Which statement best expresses a relationship between organic farming and conventional farming? In the passage. Point of view, anything in the passage, so that's good. About organic and conventional farming, what's the relationship between? Now you chose the correct line, so which would be what?
61 to 65.
So go read those lines.
Conventional agriculture makes use of 171 million metric tons of synthetic fertilizer each year, and all that nitrogen enables much faster plant growth and the slower release of nitrogen from the compost or cover crops used in organic farming.
So if this is the answer is conventional agriculture uses synthetic fertilizer, which is faster, and organic uses compost, which is slower.
Oh, that's obvious.
Yeah, and it says it pretty directly here.
Yeah.
So just get used to using exactly the words in those lines.
Yeah, okay.
Next.
31. I feel like I didn't really understand the graph, and that's why I thought.
Yeah, that's, there's no y-axis, it's just an x-axis.
And I don't know if the dotted.
Yeah, it took me a long time to figure out the dotted line was just the,
Yeah, at 100%.
yeah.
So when, I don't recommend that you try to read the data and understand it and then go figure the question. It's very difficult. In fact, let me make 2 comments. First and foremost, you've got to always read the heading to see what does the data actually measure. Because they love to give you answers that use numbers that seem plausible, but they're referencing something that the data doesn't really measure. Like they're measuring what percentage of ideas come from this scenario as opposed to what percentage of people like it, right? So we have to understand what the numbers actually tell us. So from the heading here, we read that organic yield as a percentage of conventional yield. What are we measuring? The organic farming percentage of conventional. So I'm comparing how much yield organic farming can produce compared to conventional. And when I look down below, I look at the key, I see, okay, each one of these different types of crops, and underneath it says at 100% organic yield is the same as conventional. So if we read those, it's gonna take us a little less time to understand what that dotted line is. So I read heading, footer, key, and what you find out is that the questions themselves quite often help you interpret it further. But always read heading, key, footing, X and Y coordinates, but there's no Y this time. And I say this also, if anyone ends up taking the ACT test, the science section, it's a bunch of science readings, and which are interpreting data and so forth. And I say the same thing to them all the time. Don't sit there and try to interpret the data. Read to understand the big picture of what it's measuring. Then the questions themselves will help you understand and interpret the data better. And sometimes these types of questions, we can't just go, oh, I know the answer to that question, because it says, which claim is supported? And you're like, I don't know, I gotta go read every single claim and try to disprove. If I can't disprove it, it's probably the right answer. So of the organically grown species, so let's start out with what answers did we pick that were wrong? A. Of the organically grown species represented, soybeans have the lowest yield. I think soybeans, looking at 90%, seem to have the highest yield. So yeah, maybe we're looking at the order in which it appeared in the key versus the percentage.
I think it's, yeah,
Next.
so it's between A and B. Like this between B and C. Yeah, I did not know.
B was so wordy that it was like hard to understand.
Which one, B?
Yeah.
The organically grown maize and barley are comparable in their yields to conventionally, oh yeah. So they throw in all these words and all they're really asking is organic versus conventional.
How can you tell? Like, is it just like
Because all organic, because that's what we're measuring, all organic yields less than 100% of the conventional. So no, none of those are gonna be comparable to the conventional. So. Again, I go back to, with these types of questions, attack it with the mindset of trying to disprove it.
Wait, can you explain key though?
The organically grown species, organic, have lower yields than conventional. Yes, they all yield less than 100% of conventional, because that's what the heading says we're measuring, organic versus conventional.
Okay.
And beneath, it tells us that the 100% line is how much is conventional. And so they all yield less than 100% of conventional.
Okay.
So that was actually more broad versus like specific.
In this particular, well, no, they could have given you specifics. They could have given you a specific claim, right?
Yeah.
It's just the way they decided to word all of the items. This one just turned out to be broad. So I don't look at this and go, oh, we look for the broad answer here. No, we interpret the data. We interpret the data, and in this case, they made a general statement that was true. But I don't pick, it's not one of those where I pick it because it's a general statement.
Yeah.
It's all about interpreting the data. All right. Next.
Yeah, 33.
The 33, 34, 10. All right, let's start with, the author of the passage suggests that crowds may be more effective at something. So my question is, what are crowds more effective at? According to the author, not someone the author quotes, not according to some theory, but point of view, the author specifically, yes? All right. Many of these questions we've bumped into, they said the passage, and so that's great. But now when they say the author, you gotta get sensitive to it because they may trap you with the author talking about someone else. So, point of view of the author about what crowds are better at. What are crowds better at, according to the author? Let's go read the lines in 34. Let's just walk through all the set of lines. Line 9. Sometimes a crowd really is wiser than you. Well, to me, I think that provides an answer. The crowd is better at being wise. I'm using these words. The crowd's better at being wise than you. Because this is the author talking. He's not quoting. Does anything say in 33, the crowd's better at being wise? Then I have to throw out lines A for 34. Which I think did provide an answer. It's kind of a weird answer, but it's not all. Volunteer for lines 11 to 14.
Your guess is probably going to be far from the mark, whereas the average of many people's choices is remarkably close to a true number.
Would many people give us the right point of perspective about crowds being better? Many people would be crowds, right? Okay, so it's the author speaking, yes? It's about crowds. Okay, so I think maybe this provides an answer. It says, your guess will be far off the mark, whereas the average of many people is remarkably close to a true number. So, if this is the answer, which I think it meets my perspective disqualifiers, the answer would be the crowd is better at guessing a true number. Does anything say that the crowd is better at guessing a true number? What does quantitative mean? Numbers. This might be it. Let's go read our other lines just in case. Lines 17 to 20. Another volunteer, please.
According to one theory, the wisdom of the crowd still holds. Measuring the aggregate of people's opinions produces a stable...
According to what?
According to the aggregate of...
No, the very first beginning.
One theory.
Oh, so not the author. Who picked this as an answer? You missed the trap of it wasn't from the right point of view. It was from a theory. Got it? That's, as soon as I say according to one theory, I go wrong point of view. Next set of lines. 25 to 28.
To test if your hypothesis is true, you would need to manipulate huge numbers of people, exposing them to false information and determining how it affects them.
I don't have crowds being better at anything here. So definitely what we thought would work is gotta be the answer. Nothing else is there. Next.
39.
Sorry?
39.
I'm 36.
Yeah, 36.
Which action would best address a question Watts raised about the study? I don't know, what question did he raise about the study? I can't answer that till I know. That's why 36 in some ways is difficult, because first I have to find out, well, what question did he raise? And then you have to address it. Well, here's Duncan Watts introduced in line 72, right?
Yeah.
Okay, agrees. But one question is whether positive bias is specific to the site or in general. So that's his question. According to Watts, he wants to know, is the bias specific to that particular website or is it more general? Providing fewer fake, using multiple websites. Whether that would address his question, right? Because he wants to know if it's unique to this site or in general. So if we use multiple websites, that would give us if it applied more broadly or just to one site only. Next.
39. y-axis wrong. So I didn't see that I was going by halves.
Ah, which category of news has an artificially upvoted mean score of 2.5? Artificially upvoted. Yeah. Is it that simple?
Oh, so you're just looking at where the dot is?
Yeah.
Oh, I was looking at like how long it is.
So the control, oh, yeah, so you're looking for the range. But if I read my key, the control is the empty circle and the artificial upvote is the filled in circle.
Oh, that's so.
And it's pain, yeah, that's frustrating. Next,
44.
basic in 24. It had long been thought that the adult brain was incapable of spawning new neurons. That while learning caused synapses to rearrange themselves and new links between brain cells to form, the brain's basic anatomical structure was more or less static. So the brain's basic, I'm gonna read through, let me just read through. The Barr study suggested, okay, so that doesn't give me additional information. So basic structure, I think the word that matters to me is it's linked with structure. And a basic structure, I would take the word structure, right? And just think in terms of a framework. Any words that we would throw in of our own before we look at their answers?
I feel like I would
Fun-
throw in fundamental.
I think I would probably want to throw in fundamental, I almost just said fundamental, and is that offered?
Yeah.
That's an answer.
That happens rarely. It's nice when it does happen.
Yeah. I feel like especially in reference to things like in the body, when they're talking about basic, it means like what's fundamental to build up, I think that.
Yes, but if we just take the word structure, which it's linked to, initial, that's timing. Simple, maybe. Necessary? I don't. Maybe, I would leave all three of those as maybes, then I'd go and take a closer look and maybe just plug them in as a final to the clarification. All right, next.
Yeah, 49.
According to the passage, when compared to mental athletes, individuals in the control group in Barr's study, second study, so we have to compare mental athletes to the individuals. And what did you pick for an answer?
Well, I picked A, but I didn't know that was their answer. So maybe I got it right.
I thought the right answer was C.
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay,
Yeah.
Yeah, so
So I'm looking at this, showed less brain activity overall. If we're thinking in terms of our filters, what words, without having read this, without having any frame of reference, what words in that answer should you be concerned about overall? Is the entire brain showing less activity? I don't know. It could be, that could be the case, but we have to look at that as a potential disqualifier. And I think that's what does disqualify this. You know, it's a good exercise to go through answers and just say, I'm suspicious of this word. I'm suspicious of these words. You know, even when I find the right answer, it usually has a word that I'm suspicious of. Okay, you're all right, I proved you fine, but I was worried about you, right? And that's skeptically looking at the answers with filters up.
yeah.
51, so, the passage most strongly suggests that mental athletes are successful at memorizing because. So it's from the point of view of the passage, that's nice. It's about why mental athletes are successful at memorizing. Let's start with the lines you chose.
I chose 66 to 72.
Once again, why are mental athletes good at memorizing?
Wait, shoot, I chose 7951.
So read those.
McGuire and her team asked the mental athletes to describe what was going on through their minds as they memorized.
I do not get a question to my I do not get an answer to my fundamental question of why. That's a hard strike because there's no why. So that's, again, a fundamental is articulate that question as an actual question. And if they leave it open-ended with the word because or due to, that means why. So let's go, yes.
If they did lines, 87, like rather to practice, would that like give a different answer?
Absolutely, yeah.
Cause it talks about how to train and practice,
Yes,
and that's like,
but here's one of the reasons why a lot of students had difficulties with these. And early on when they came up, I forget how many years ago now, when they first developed this new test model, one of the biggest issues that I found was that my students and I were like, I don't like any of these lines of evidence. Here's my lines of evidence, right? But that's not how we don't get to pick our lines.
I know
Yeah.
sometimes like that's, if you read the whole passage, then like you get like your own idea what's it about, and then when it asks you a question, you're like.
And that's why you gotta get OCD sticking to those lines
Yeah.
to avoid their traps. And do keep in mind, that like we said before, every set of lines they give you can provide an answer.
Yeah.
And every answer would be different. And so if you picked other sets of lines, they would provide yet a different answer. So let's go find, what is it that tells us why they're good at memorizing, why they're successful at memorizing. So, and who got 51 right? So the answer is A, which is
66 to 72.
surprisingly, when the mental athletes were learning new information, they were engaging several regions of the brain known to be involved with two specific tasks. Where is it? Oh, visual memory and spatial navigation, including, oh, that goes, wait, including the same right posterior hippocampal region that the London cavities had enlarged with all their daily wayfinding. So the answer, if this is the answer is engages several regions of the brain. They were engaging several different regions of the brain. That's my answer. I go and I check, and there's only one that matches that nicely. All right, let's shift gears to writing and language. Writing and language. Writing and language. First item up for bids. 3. The writer is considering deleting the underlying sentence. So this is a sentence placement, so this is flow in, flow out, right? So what's our flow in? Whereas the head of an ordinary computer printer moves back and forth while printing ink into paper. Well, to me, that already gives me a clue that I'm comparing the ordinary printer to something else, so whatever it is I'm comparing it to must be mentioned in the previous sentence. The corresponding part of a 3D printer moves in multiple directions while squirting out thin layers of melted polymer plastic. Now, I then ask the question, why did you tell me that it shoots out this different plastic? And you know how we talked about, I'm gonna put this, you know how we talked about for the flow in, we talked about looking for pronouns, we talked about looking for transitions, and we talked about looking for this, that, these, those, the, right? And timing for flow and clues, right? I want to extend this a little bit. I've been telling my students to look for these things, not just in the sentence in question, but look at them, look at proposed flow out sentence. Good. flow-out sentence. Why? Because these, in the flow-out sentence, could tell me what I need, whether the sentence proposed should go here or not. Look at the proposed flow-out sentence in this case, where it's put. It says what?
The plastic card is quite
The plastic. What plastic? The plastic I just mentioned in the sentence that you better not remove or this won't make sense. Right? So not only should we look at these for flow into the sentence in question, we also ought to look at them in the proposed flow out to see if that could provide us clues as well.
For like finding the answer, I knew it had to be kept because of that, but then what I was like looking for is kept because it introduces something that's also in the next sentence.
So the answer is, don't go in to keep it with any particular reason in mind.
Okay,
You've got to assess and analyze the reasons they give.
okay.
And if both reasons they give don't work, you have to then entertain the thought, well, I thought it should be kept, maybe it shouldn't be kept, right? But in this case, let's go analyze, because it helps explain why x-rays are used in CT scanning. No, it's not describing anything about x-rays, it's talking about 3D printers, hard strike on A. Because it provides details to illustrate how 3D printers work, yeah, I think it does that. So I'm okay with leaving it. Because I knew it had to be, I knew I had to keep it. And so of the two, that's the only one that makes sense. So don't go in with any preconceived notion. Just analyze the answers offered. Next, 15. Anything before 15?
9.
Number 9. When I see a bunch of verbs offered, rule number 1, what's the subject? Then we'll worry about the timing after. Too many students go right for the timing. Always check the subject first. So by contrast, researchers from the National Museum of Brazil, so what's my subject? Researchers. Now, sometimes it's a little bit tricky for you to clarify what would be the right verb form that goes with it. So if you see that it's plural, substitute, if it makes it easier for you, substitute in the word they. If it's singular, substitute in for it the word it, and then test that with your verb options. Would you say they has? Throw out a. Could you say they relied? Could you say they will rely? Yes. Could you say they is relied? No, they isn't. Cross it out. Why? I apologize to my Southern family members, but anytime you want to try to act ignorant, you take a Southern accent for some reason. It's not fair. One of the smartest people I know is my cousin who graduated UT, Texas, summa cum laude. Geological engineer, been all over the world. Sorry, Bo, just kidding. Yeah, and then if we want to try to sound smart, we affect a British accent. Why do we have that cultural bias?
Good question.
It is what it is, sorry. Let's move on. So we know it has to be B or C, then we can now we can consider the timing, and clearly we're talking about past tense, not future tense, right? If you look, is there another verb elsewhere? Discovered, see, you know, in the same sentence, we see another verb that tells us, oh, it's gotta be past, not future.
Yeah.
But start with subject. Next. 15? All right, I'm going to read the no pause option first, right? Isn't that our strategy? Let's go test D. Boss Tweed's Tammany Hall Group, which controlled New York City in the 1860s, stole more than 30 million. Yeah, no, it's running on. I tried it. I promise you it doesn't always work, right? I warned you, so anyone who picked D, don't blame me for saying to test it first. I tested it and I don't like it. I need to pause here, and it's quite simply, I'm going to test it now with a comma because there's another comma elsewhere, right? We're looking for other punctuation elsewhere, and it looks to me like it could potentially be parenthetical. So let's go test it between commas. Definitely not gonna be A because there's no other dashes for dash in, dash out. Unless the last part is parenthetical only, but I think I can get rid of from which to 1860s. Let me read without that, see if that's parenthetical. Voss Tweed's Tammany Hall Group stole more than $30 million. Yeah, it's parenthetical. It's gotta be between dashes or between commas or parentheses. And since they have a comma after group, I need a comma after 1860s.